Welcome to the Happy Recap Podcast. I'm JB along with EJ. We're glad to have you along on this Thanksgiving weekend. We've got a special show for you. Brian Wright is going to join us to talk about all-time All-Stars, the New York Mets, and look at some of the Mets from through the years of positions and where they rank and where they stand in an all-time stature. And EJ, as we kind of look at the last week or so of Mets baseball, not a tremendous amount of news to report, but one thing I know that I touched on in the conversation with Brian, which we had a couple of days ago, was the retirement of Terry Collins. And you and I, the original version of the show, basically spanned the Terry Collins era of New York Mets baseball. I mean, we started just shortly before he came on board and wrapped up, right around the same time as we just kind of come to that conclusion. Yeah, it's probably time for Terry to move on. But I kind of wanted, with a couple of years in the rearview mirror, I just wanted to get your take a little bit about what do you think Terry's legacy is to this ball club?
I look back pretty fondly on Terry Collins. Obviously, he did have some in-game management issues when it came to bullpen usage. What major league manager doesn't get criticized for that? I don't know.
Yep.
But for the most part, I enjoyed Terry Collins' time as the Mets manager. I'll always harken back to that awesome video our friend Matthew Cerrone posted in spring training of Terry literally sprinting from field to field to take in all the different levels of action that were going on with his team. He brought an enthusiasm to the team. He brought energy to the team. I was never embarrassed to have Terry Collins as our manager. I thought he handled the reporters very well, the New York media very well. And I look back fondly on Terry. He wasn't my favorite Mets manager, but he is certainly nowhere near the bottom of my preferences of Mets managers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one of the things that strikes me most about Terry is, and you'll see me talk about this in more detail with Brian later on, is that he did a lot so many times with so little. Pulling out a win when you've got like Eric Campbell in the cleanup spot, basically. These subpar lineups that basically were mandated by Madoff, if you will. I was just, that was the thing for me. And he never seemed to give up. He always believed in his guys. He always had their back. I mean, one of the things that we knew especially those of us who follow closely, knew that these guys would go to the gallows basically for Terry Collins. And, when that video surfaced a couple of years ago of the umpire ejecting Noah and the reaction thereof, just kind of confirm what we already knew, is how tightly that Terry had their backs and why they wanted to play for this guy. This is the guy they wanted to play. They wanted to go into battle for, and you see why. And, as someone who was definitely not early in his career known as a player's manager, he really kind of, evolved into almost a perfect he still had the fire in his belly. He still had the back of his players, and he still went out there and tried to win every game. And sometimes he took it personal, and he certainly his more than colorful language at press conferences, and a couple of words like cripes that have become catchphrases across the Mets Twitter, but and through the media too. But I think that Terry, for me, probably, I mean, the grand scheme of Mets managers, is probably top 5. I rank him pretty high, and I think you can make a case at number 4 or number 5, because it's ahead of that. You've definitely got Bobby, Davey, and Gil, no question. The only question is where you rank Willie. And to me, it's Willie and Terry are interchangeable in 4 and 5, and you can make a very good argument on both of them for either position. And I think that, when we get even further away from it and see more, I can tell you right now, that's a man whom I hope writes a book in his retirement. I want to read that. I want to read the Terry Collins story. And I also said online and, made sure I tagged our esteemed owner, who, responds to many, but so far not me, but that's okay. But I said, he's probably not somebody whose number is going to be retired, but I'd sure, as their crowds let back into city, I'd sure like to see a Terry Collins day. Just honor the guy. He was a good guy in a bad time. He was the right man for the job. It turned out he wasn't my choice. I remember that. I was lobbying hard for Clint Hurdle, but he was the right guy at the right time, and he definitely made the most out of his Mets. And without him, I don't think we see 2 playoff appearances in the middle part of the last decade.
Much like we've said about Brodie Van Wagenen and trying to evaluate him as a general manager under the Wilpons and how it's not really fair to do so, I feel the same way about Terry, because we never got to see what Terry could do with an actual major market type of budget to acquire the players that you need to have sustained success. That being said, I totally agree with you about the fact that the guys would run through a brick wall for him. We saw that time and time again in their undying support of him. So any manager who could have that much of the clubhouse getting his back, and it's the the old cliche, 10 guys are going to love you, 10 guys are going to hate you. What matters is those 5 guys who are in between, what the manager does with them. I don't think that was the case with Terry. I think that clubhouse genuinely, the majority of them really, really like him. And I remember back when Art Howe, who's on the complete opposite end of my favorite Mets manager spectrum, when he was let go, he got very emotional in a goodbye interview in talking about his relationship with Mike Piazza, which I don't think a lot of us knew at that time how tight those two really were. Well, I always got that same feeling about Terry Collins and David Wright. I felt like those two were very intertwined towards the end, and I feel that if you have the ultimate respect of David Wright, then damn if I don't have to give you the ultimate respect.
Yeah, and I think the thing, too, is, we can certainly rehash this a million times over, but as far as special moments for Mets and Mets fans alike, I'm not sure a lot of lesser managers leave Johan Santana in that game.
It's a good point.
As much as Terry fought himself to do it. He fought internally to go ahead and do it. I think a lot of lesser managers fairly justifiably pull the plug on their formerly injured ace and say, "Sorry, not tonight," or we'll try and pick you up with the pen and see if we can get the split no hitter. But I think that was another great testament to Terry in that he listened to his players. Now, sometimes to a fault. I mean, some will always blame him for not listening or for listening to Matt Harvey and getting back into the World Series game. But overall, I think when you look at it, he was a player's manager, a smart manager, definitely had some bullpen issues. But realistically, you asked every baseball team, what is your worst feature in your manager? And unless you have a new manager that hasn't stepped on the field yet, the answer is going to be bullpen management. I guarantee you that. So it's one of those comments I don't take as seriously, but it's certainly a lost art, bullpen management. And I think that, for me, Terry is one of the all-time greats to wear the blue and orange and sit in that dugout and call the shots. And also, I think potentially because of the way the game has changed, EJ, maybe the last traditional Mets manager we've ever had or will ever have.
No doubt about it. The game has changed so significantly. Terry was a big believer in what I see with my eyes is reality. I don't believe he was into the metrics as much as a lot of these new younger guys are. And that's the other thing. We're seeing kind of a youth movement when it comes to managers these days. And I think we're going to continue to see that. We saw it with Mickey Callaway. He's a young guy, and he very much believed in the metrics. And I think that is going to be the way of the future. And you're right. I think Terry's from a generation that when we look back on, we're going to realize that, wow, some of these guys were really, really damn good. And I think he's going to be among those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some people may need a little more distance in the mirror for that than others, but certainly wish Terry all the best. Thank you for leaving Johan in, and thank you for everything you did in 2015 and 2016, and actually the whole time you were here, for making a lot of what should have been unwatchable baseball very watchable. May not have been winning years, but they were watchable years. And quite frankly, we've had a few unwatchable years. So I know how to take those with and appreciate them. Though hopefully EJ coming up, unwatchable will not be in Met fans' lexicon.
I don't think it's going to be for a very long time, my friend. I think at the very least, just watching our owner interact with fans on Twitter is going to be very watchable.
Absolutely. And I would, I also want to again recommend the book that we are going to talk to Brian Wright about. I've got it right here. The New York Mets all-time All-Stars. EJ, it's one of those things I mentioned in the interview. It's that time of year where you're getting gifts for your Met fan friends, whether it be, newer fans or older fans or, kids trying to get into the game. It's a great book to learn about some players from the Mets past that are particularly good and memorable and likable and all those type of things. So a great book. Brian Wright's a great guy, and it's a fun interview. We're going to check in with that right now. Thanks again for joining us on the Happy Recap podcast. I'm JB, and I've got with me on the line through the magic of Zoom, of course, Brian Wright. He has written the book, The New York Mets, All-Time All-Stars. And as we head towards the holidays, as weird as they may be this year, still plenty of room to give people gifts. And what better way to say I love you to the Met fan in your life than, a Met-related gift. And I know my favorites over the years were those of the paper variety, and many of my classic Met books collections come in the form of gifts. So if you want to make your day for a Mets fan, a book is a great way. And what better way, especially in something that can be both for the experienced fan and for the new fan looking for a bit of a primer as to what they've gotten themselves into, than this book. Brian Wright, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, JB. It's great to be on.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the genesis of the book. Of course, all-time All-Stars indicates, we take in each position and take a look at the player. What made you decide to put this together into a book?
Well, it was really the genesis of it was Lyons Press, the publisher. They came to me shortly after my first book was published, Mets and Tens, and said, "Hey, we're doing this series of all-time All-Stars for various teams." They already had the Yankees kind of underway, and they were working on the Green Bay Packers, so they were touching different sports, of course. And they came to me and said, "Oh, how would you like to do the Mets?" And it just shortly after the first book came out, which was April of 2018, I was a little bit tired, and I really wanted to take a break from writing a book. So I said, give me about 6 months. I didn't say I did say if you find someone else, great, but I just said I'm not really ready. And about 6 or 7 months later, I came back to them. I said, "Are you still looking for someone?" They said, "Yeah." So that's really how it came about. It was really their idea as far as the book, the framework of the idea. I kind of was given a little bit of flexibility with how I devised the team and the criteria by which I chose it. So that's really how it all started. So, and then 8-9 months later, I had the first manuscript done, and we're off and running.
Well, certainly, when you start with the Mets, they're certainly, without looking at positions even, there are two lights that always shine. One is the number 41 in the sky, and certainly the other is the more recent number 31, Mike Piazza. Talk a little bit about going into the starting pitching and realistically what it was like to plan the people behind Tom Seaver, because really, is there any competition?
Well, no, yeah. I mean, he's on the cover, and he's the first person that's discussed. And I think the first sentence I said was, the argument about greatest Met ever isn't an argument at all, because it's him and only him in terms of that debate. But after him, as you said, it gets a little interesting. And in fact, starting pitching was I would say the most difficult position. Maybe it was. It was challenging in the sense I had so much talent to work with. And you think about it, through the years, the Mets have had great success with starting pitching. We talk about Seaver and Kuzman and going down to Dwight Gooden and then David Cohn and then up to now with Jacob deGrom. It's been pretty remarkable over the last 50 plus seasons how the Mets have always really had great starting pitching. The challenge in there was, and also dealing with the amount of flexibility I was given by the publishers, was I could make the roster. I could devise the roster however I wanted in terms of position. So starting pitching, I didn't have just a 4 or 5 man rotation. I kind of did it like you would do for a normal all-star game, where you sometimes, depending on how good everyone is, you kind of say, okay, well, I'm going to take 6 starting pitchers. I'm going to take 7 starting pitchers. In this case, for the book, I took 7 starters because I didn't want to reduce it to just 4 or just 5. because I felt that would be unfair. Because ultimately the goal of the book was to tell the history of the Mets through the stories of these 35 personalities, 30 players, 30-man roster, and then manager, coaches, and owner, and GM. So I felt it was going to be doing a disservice to that concept if I didn't take more starters. So even by bringing it to 7 starters and thus having only 3 relief pitchers, it was still difficult narrowing it down to 7. The 2 I left out, I could easily have put them in. And even people have said, "Oh, you should have had those people in," and I can't really disagree or say, "Oh, you're wrong." It was just kind of based on the criteria I had laid out, were the 7 best pitchers that I came up with. So that was the challenge in terms of too much talent. Some other positions I sometimes didn't really have enough. So and then when you
Which
talk
has
about
been the case for the team over the years. I mean, there's certainly,
yeah,
as bad as the Mets have been in most years, more years than not, they have had at least one quality starting pitcher.
oh yeah,
And that's kind of been sort of the hallmark. This has been a pitching franchise.
yeah, no, absolutely. And not only starting pitching is the kind of the hallmark of the Mets organization. If you're talking from a position perspective, one that doesn't get talked about enough, and this will tie into Mike Piazza, is the catching position. It's interesting if you look at it, the Mets have had really good catchers over the years, going back to Jerry Grody and then coming into to John Stearns and then Gary Carter and then then Todd Hundley, who had the most home runs by any Met in the 1990s, and then you get to Mike Piazza. So they've been very fortunate in that category, and Piazza was a clear choice as far as the starting catcher is concerned. I love Gary Carter. He was the first player that I ever clung to when I was a young kid. But when you look at his Gary Carter's statistics, his impact is tremendous in helping push the Mets over the top. But his best numbers came with Montreal. So as much as Gary Carter is obviously worthy of being on this team, and he is, Mike Piazza was the clear person to go with the starting position, especially since he's the second Hall of Famer to go in his event.
Yeah, I mean, statistically speaking, I mean, with Gary, I mean, who is one of my, if not, he's in my top 3, if not, number 1 or number 2 all time as far as Mets go. I mean, it is hard to deny that after the end of his peak of his career was 1986, and that it was which was his second full year with the Mets, and whereas Piazza had quite a few of his peak seasons with the New York Mets. And that was one of the rarities in acquiring Piazza at that point, is the Mets were not typically acquiring players who were in their prime. Then they bring in Piazza and eventually Beltran, who is also in his prime, and you get some of the better offensive players this team's ever had, as opposed to bringing somebody in more on the tail end of their career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Carlos Beltran is very underrated in terms of Mets history. I think he gets underappreciated for a lot of different reasons, and what happened.
Most of them have to do with an Adam Wainwright curveball.
Yes, which is very unfair. I mean, as much as upset as that game made me, as how old was I, 18, 19 years old? I can't ever look at, I can always look at the bigger picture and know that Carlos Beltran as a player is one of the best to ever play for the Mets. And you're right, they have never ever brought many players in their prime. They've homegrown. They've had, cultivated a few, not many. When you talk about Darryl Strawberry and David Wright, as far as position players are concerned.
Alfonso. I mean, it's a short list.
Not many. So the fact that you bring in a guy like Piazza in a trade and Beltran as free agent, those are 2 rare gems in terms of kind of going out and finding those key acquisitions, and the Mets did that in '98, and that was obviously a big deal, and reverberated for the next 7 seasons.
Now we just mentioned Alfonso. Let's kind of move along to second base, where it's not exactly as I mean, if you name a Met second baseman, it's a little bit tougher than naming a Met outfielder or naming a Met pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, catcher's pretty obvious. First base you could do with your hand tied behind your back. Second base is where it seems to become a bit of a challenge again.
Yeah, it's interesting that second base, I actually was able to get a few players on the team, but it was a challenge determining who that was going to be. Alfonso is, again, another clear choice at second base. One kind of qualifier, I guess, I had for this team was I judged a player as, in terms of like what position are they going to go at? Because Alfonso went from, I don't know where he eventually started. I don't know where he started his career, but he went from third base to second base to, and he went back and forth. But I made sure to judge these players based on the position they have played most frequently, and he played second base slightly more than he played third base. So by that rule, he's a second baseman. So and also he's an easy choice. But I think he's also underrated because of that he played in the shadow of Piazza. And Alfonso had so many clutch moments. I just think of October of 1999 when he's hitting, the home run against the Reds. He's hitting the home run and 2 home runs in Game 1 against the Diamondbacks. He goes on a stretch that carries over into 2000, where I think he hit in 10 or 11 or 12 consecutive postseason games. He was a guy you could most rely on. And as far as Mets second basemen, again, it's a clear choice.
Yeah, I think in that era, honestly, given if I need to drive in a run, if I've got a guy on second, if I've got a guy on third, and I want to know that guy's coming home, I think I choose Alfonso over Piazza even to get that run in. He was that clutch.
Yeah, no, and I always think there's one game I always think about with Alfonso. It's not the game that it's a game everyone thinks about. But I always think of the Grand Slam single game, and I think with runners on first, this is the bottom of the 15th when they're still down a run, runners on first and second, and Alfonso, drove in a lot of runs, reliable hitter. He bunts, he gets the runners over to second and third because that's the job. So he was in his understated way, he would do what was needed, whether it was bunting runners over or driving them in or hitting a home run.
The game I always think of as far as the clutchness of Beltran is a game I was at a number of years ago in 2000, Fireworks Night, which is otherwise known to Mets fans as the 10-run inning.
Yeah.
And, the Mets are down 8-1 going into the 8th. Bottom of the 8th comes up. They score their first run on the second out and proceed to bring it to 8-7. And Alfonso's up, gets a base hit, ties the game at 8. And then Piazza comes in, hits the 3-run homer that everyone remembers. Yeah. Without Alfonso, Piazza doesn't come to the plate. His clutchness. And that's always what I think about. Whether you needed him to be clutch or you needed him to be the table setter or both, that was your guy.
Yeah, that's actually the second game I was thinking of that gets forgotten because, and look, a lot of Mets had to get on base with 2 outs and all those, consecutive successful plate appearances with 2 outs.
It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in person.
Yeah. But Alfonso, the guy before Piazza, to get that hit to tie the game was obviously most important. And it gets, rightfully so, it gets forgotten because of the fireworks that Piazza delivered.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that because there were fireworks after the game is why there was even a soul still in the building when that happened. That should have happened in front of a crowd emptier than what we saw in 2020. Yeah. But so let's move along. I mean, the Mets have had a lot of shortstops that we're very affectionate towards, fan favorites. Certainly your choice and your number one, Buddy Harrelson comes to mind, especially, and Reyes. I mean, they've all been fan favorites. Reyes obviously is not thought of as a fan favorite anymore because of off the field issues. But talk a little bit about this position, which is probably met with more affection than it is statistical success.
Yeah, this is one of the positions where I found it tough I guess it wasn't tough. It was tough to find a depth of talent, but it was easy to determine who was on the team. When you talk about Jose Reyes and Bud Harrelson, those are, again, pretty obvious choices, different in their own ways, in which Jose Reyes was a guy who got on base, got hits, stole bases, was just, for my money, the most exciting player to ever play for the Mets. And you're right, the off-the-field issues have really tarnished his reputation, and justly and rightfully so.
Right.
But when you talk about second most hits in Mets history, it's Jose Reyes. And again, the excitement level that he brought to that team, specifically in 2006. I mean, I just think about that and how electric he made it, just Shea Stadium in 2006, and then the subsequent seasons before moving on. But Harrelson was very different in the fact that the team that he was a part of in the late 60s and early to mid 70s was reliant on pitching and defense. And he suited that team so perfectly in that he could save a bunch of runs. He was at times a good hitter, but was mostly there for his glove. And when he was out occasionally, I think in 1973 he missed time, and almost everyone did. But him not being there was important, or was vital in the fact that the Mets couldn't get out of the cellar at the beginning of the season. So he was a reliable glove, and like I said, the 1969 team. When you talk about how important strength of the middle was with the pitchers and gritty behind the plate, aging in center field, certainly Bud Harrelson is among that. So two different players that really made their impact in two different ways.
It's funny. I mean, you look at the pictures of Bud when he was playing, and he doesn't look like what you would consider a prototypical baseball player in today's game for certain. He's not jacked up with a six-pack, all muscles, and gleamed for speed, kind of like a physique like even Jose Reyes had. But this is a guy who stood up to Pete Rose.
Oh, yeah.
And that's probably one of his most famous moments, is a moment where Pete Rose basically got up in his face and attacked the guy. Now, I'm in my 40s now. Pete Rose is pushing 80. If he tried to come at me now, I'd run. And that's now. And this is Pete Rose in his physical prime. And Bud Harrelson, against all odds, David versus Goliath kind of thing, stands up to him.
Yeah, no, I mean, Bud Harrelson would never back down from anyone, much less someone of Pete Rose's size. So not all that surprising that he would take that stand against Pete Rose. The fight didn't last long,
No.
But still, nonetheless, the lasting impact is the fact that Bud Harrelson was willing to take on all comers and really, fight them at any point. So he got by, and he succeeded through guile and will and just kind of knowledge of the field, and that's why he went on to be a Mets coach and a Met manager for albeit a short period of time. But in fact, he did move up the coaching ranks later on after his career.
And then, of course, to manage the Mets eventually as well. But the one thing my parents were at that game in '73 in the playoffs, and my dad had told me when I was much, much younger that the unrest in the stadium lasted far longer than the fight itself. And he had indicated to me, and I've always meant to ask someone about this, that the reason there were those cages on the field level and you had to show your ticket to get in past the fencing was because so many people had run down and pelted Pete Rose with stuff during that fight. It seems plausible, but I never went to confirm that.
Yeah, I don't know how long after that fight that they had to stop the game, but there was a contingent of, Willie Mays and Tom Seaver and Rusty Staub to go out and plead to the crowd, please do not throw stuff. It worked because they got to finish the game, but there was a threat, at least, from the umpiring crew that they would forfeit the game if the fans didn't calm down somewhat. So at least they were able to finish the game, but I know that it was probably a tough time for Pete Rose after that incident.
Those were pretty rowdy days at Shea anyway, that 72 to 75 block when the other team in town was using Shea as home.
Yeah.
And they didn't quite respect it the way Met fans did.
Yeah, and you talk about, I think it was 1975, maybe it was 2 seasons, but 75, I think the Mets and Yankees obviously used the stadium, and then the Jets and the Giants prior to the Meadowlands being built.
Right.
Obviously, the Jets were home at Shea Stadium, but the Giants, I guess, were going from Yankee Stadium to eventually transferring to the Meadowlands, and all four of those teams used the field in that 1 year.
Crazy stuff. And we one of the old jokes used to be that the Mets couldn't find a third baseman to save their lives, and certainly they've gone through a number of them. But the cream does rise to the top on this. Let's talk about the top of the heap of third base.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like my job is pretty easy when I talk about the starters, and David Wright is an easy choice at third base, and I don't know, he's for my money the best offensive player in Mets history. When you talk about not only just the numbers he put up, but the length at which he did it. I know some people might think Mike Piazza, but David Wright, when you have the most hits, you have the most doubles, and you lead in just pretty much every offensive category in team history, you should be chosen as the best position player. So he was an easy choice. I make that choice with obviously some regret, as everyone else does, the fact that he should be a Hall of Famer, if not for all those injuries. But again, I mean, David Wright's legacy as far as the Mets is secure, and I'm looking forward to when he gets his number retired.
I think with me and David Wright, there's always going to be two questions in my mind. What would those numbers have looked like without injury? And the only other player I wonder that more about is Ken Griffey Jr., who is still a Hall of Famer despite his injury history. But with Wright, the other thing was he had a very tough adjustment to Citi Field, and especially the first couple of years with the Great Wall of Flushing and all of those elements thrown in. I wonder what the stats would have looked like with David Wright playing his entire career at Shea Stadium or his entire Mets career, obviously, which was his entire career, but at Shea Stadium the way that Piazza did and Strawberry did, etc.
Yeah,
I feel like they would have been. I think you're absolutely right. Surefire first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I mean, if there's no doubt that if he had played his whole career at Shea Stadium, his numbers would have been different. With that right field or left field fence, I should say, being so far back when Citi Field began in 2009, and in 2009 he missed a few games. I think maybe missed 10 or 12, but he only had 10 home runs the entire season. When you go back to 2008, he hit 33. So it does pain me to think about that as well. And I know he eventually bounced back the following season, but then the injuries came. So
right,
as the fence moved in, the injuries came, and then who knows? So David Wright is a giant what if in Mets history, but I like to look at the fact that in the vacuum of Mets history, he is a pillar of this organization.
Yeah, it's one of those things that on Mount Metsmore, or whatever you want to call it, the Mount Rushmore of Mets. There is definitely a scrawny kid from Norfolk, Virginia. I mean, there's no question in my mind. He's on that with Tom and Mike, etc. He's on that mountain, and because he is one of the top Mets of all time, and is certainly, I mean, I think the injuries are a little too much for me to say, yep, he's the number one offensive player of all time. But darn, it's close in the argument. I mean, you make a very good argument for it, and I think it's hard to argue a good argument for or just slightly against it. It's tough because it's close.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's tough. I'd have to look at the statistics for him and for Mike Piazza and figure that out. But it's kind of like what I feel about choosing like the starting pitchers. If someone were to say, oh, I think those starting pitchers should be in there, the ones that I maybe had just left out, I couldn't be like, oh, you're crazy. No, it's not that. These are comparisons that both have merit.
So let's look at a little bit, and we'll do it as a bit of a whole here, the outfield. I mean, there certainly are iconic outfielders in the Mets past. I mean, ones that we remember for great moments and ones we remember for great seasons, and some we're just really affectionate for. I mean, I'd like to meet the Met fan that doesn't like Mookie. I mean, that kind of type thing. I mean, it's certainly, Tommy Agee, and, you've got classics, you've got currents, Michael Conforto for one, who certainly, should he stay with the team, and please, Michael, stay. The reality of it is he will be on that list. He will be in that top three should he continue his career as a Met. I mean, you have a lot of great outfielders, not necessarily Hall of Fame outfielders so far, but you have a lot of great outfielders. So how do you break that down?
Well, overall, like as far as the criteria, and this goes, of course, for everyone that was chosen for this team, the heaviest weight was on impact to the franchise, and maybe that's a vague term, but when I talk about impact to the franchise, I'm talking about how do you rank in Mets history, and also how important are you to building or making sure a championship happens. So obviously that gives more credence to the contributions of players from 1969 and 1986. This is the beauty of this book, is like a lot of different people can have a lot of different ways of building an all-time team, whether it's, hey, I care about cumulative statistics, or I care about, as I do, impact to the franchise. I mean, obviously if you compile great numbers, you're going to get considered and maybe even get on the team. So as far as outfielders are concerned, when I look at guys like Cleon Jones, his overall totals are not, not eye-opening. His batting average in 1969 it was the best batting average by a Met up until John Olerud in 1998, I believe. But I look at Cleon Jones and I say, okay, that 1969, what would that be without him? And it wouldn't be that good. It wouldn't, as far as scoring runs are concerned. So
and you need those.
Yeah, those are important. I mean,
even with the pitching, you need those.
Yeah. So I look at that. I look at how Cleon Jones impacted the '69 Mets. In addition to Tommy Agee, who not only provided a great bat, but we all remember, at least through video is concerned, everyone wasn't there for it, but all those great catches he made in center field. So as far as the '69 Mets, I mean, those two players stand out, and they carry that carries a lot of weight in terms of me selecting those players to make the team. So in terms of guys from '86, of course, Darryl Strawberry, but he's going to get in regardless because of the fact that he has the most home runs in Mets history. And just say what you will about how he may not have lived up to the grand expectations, but his numbers still look fantastic in terms of Mets history. I think they didn't get to the Hall of Fame level, and that was by his own faults. But as far as the Mets are concerned, by that barrier, he clears it by a lot. And then as far as other players, I mean, you talked about Mookie Wilson, and everyone talks about the ground ball. But aside from that, he had the most triples, the most stolen bases prior to Jose Reyes. Was there for the entire decade of the '80s. Other things that I look for in terms of choosing a team, and these are sometimes are intangibles, I guess. Who would you most prefer to see on a team? I mean, you could have a likable guy and they could hit 200. So okay, great. I don't really want a guy who hits 200, but Mookie Wilson was better than that, and he was likable. So that did factor in when doing that. So
and he made 50,000 people moo on a daily basis.
Yeah, and again, no one doesn't like Mookie Wilson. I mean,
yes,
I got to meet him once, and it was a thrill. It's funny because I got to meet him, and Jacob deGrom was in the same room, and I was more awestruck by Mookie Wilson than Jacob deGrom, mainly because Jacob deGrom and I are the same age, so it doesn't I don't go, oh my God, you're a hero or a legend to me. You're more of just a peer who happens to play baseball. And Mookie Wilson's oh my God, you hit the ground ball. Oh my gosh. So that was a fun experience, but I think a lot of other people feel the same way. And as far as other outfielders, I'm just thinking off the top of my head who I had. I mean, the most difficult choice I made, and I'm not going to reveal it, was a outfield position. And you talked about a few of those. You talked about Michael Conforto, and when I wrote the book, he was a very difficult choice about whether to put him in or not. I'll let readers find out what happened if they haven't read already. But that was a difficult choice when the book came out. It's interesting now. To me, he's a clear choice because of that 2020. Even though it was shortened, it was still a great season relative to the shortened year that was there. And look, I mean, let's hope that he continues that into 2021 and beyond with the Mets. So that was a very, very difficult choice that I actually flip-flopped on, that involved Michael Conforto and another player. So outfielders, there was an abundance of those that each had their own kind of significance toward Mets history, and therefore the reasons they got on are sometimes a little different. But mostly what it boils down to is how much did you impact the franchise, whether it was through sheer just numbers, or was it through, and what I like to do is this leading the team toward a World Series or a World Series championship.
So moving a little bit off the plate off the field, as we start to wrap things up here, you talk a little about managers, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But you also talk, of course, the owners. And while you could probably make a bit of a case for Nelson Doubleday, you go with Joan Payson, which is 100% understandable and in my mind correct. The question is, if you were writing the book today, where do you rank Steve Cohen? I mean, talk about a guy making an impact in mere weeks. He hasn't made a single move on the field yet, and I think we could get this guy elected mayor of the city.
Yeah, he'd get like half the vote. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what Yankee fans are thinking. They're probably shaking in their boots.
Well,
But
they elected a Red Sox fan last time, so
yeah. Anyway, so I mean, Steve Cohen, as far as the perception of the team, he's turned it around by 180 degrees. As we're talking here, it's been a day since that tweet about Bobby Bonilla Day, and like, oh, let's give him a blank, a check and drive him around the stadium, basically acknowledging it, which the Wilpons would have never done, acknowledging the moment and kind of making fun of it. Whereas most fans of other teams make fun of the Mets for the Bobby Bonilla Day situation, Steve Cohen kind of embraces it. Where I this is off topic, or this is going on a tangent, but I always hate the fact that Bobby Bonilla Day gets laughed at, or the Mets get mocked at for Bobby Bonilla Day when hundreds of players have deferred payments.
it should be Bruce Sutter Day, if you ask me. Guy's been retired since '87. He still gets a paycheck every July 1st.
Oh gosh, and he looks like Gandalf.
That
so,
too.
Yeah. But Steve Cohen, the way look, 2 days in, he's doing basically an Ask Me Anything on Twitter, which is you literally
absurd. Awesome, but absurd.
But I mean, people were like, is he really going to keep doing this? And he has, kind of. I mean, he's replied to people. He's been sarcastic. I think look, the Mets, the Wilpons were the opposite of transparent. I guess it's opaque. I don't know. They're the opposite of transparent. And Steve Cohen is just, he is just all out there.
He snapped back a media rumor the other day. I mean, it's like that's wrong.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, somebody asks him if we could get Billy Joel out at Citi Field next year, and he asks what position. So,
So yeah, I love it. As to answer your question, I have no idea where he would rank. They'd have to win the World Series first. If he wins the World Series, he goes right to the top. To me, Joan Payson, the reason I chose her, and again, another easy choice, was more than the fact that she was the owner when they won a World Series and went to another. It was about how she laid the foundation for the fandom that we have with the Mets, that we enjoy with the Mets, kind of supporting the team no matter what, because she was, she was a fan first and foremost. She was
the biggest fan.
Yeah, and she was out there. She wasn't just a business person, behind the scenes, going like, okay, I'm just in this for the money. In a similar vein to Steve Cohen, save for the high capital, they were fans of the team, and they wanted to be visible without being meddling. And I think that was Joan Payson. I think that attitude not only was present from day one with the incredible fan support the Mets had, despite losing 120 games, but it's carried over to this day. So to me, that legacy is irrefutable.
Let's talk a little bit about manager. I've got two questions here that I want to cover in our remaining minutes, and they're two separate questions, but I'll throw them both out there. You rank number one, of course, Gil Hodges. Now, I think one of the great debates amongst the Mets fan base is Gil versus Davey, and I think you can make a case, very strong cases for either. I don't think there would be if Gil doesn't die on that golf course in 1972 and manages the Mets a few more years. I don't think there is a case. It's Gil Hodges. He's already in the Hall of Fame as a manager, yada, 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 etc. The fact that he, didn't manage as long as the Mets would have hoped because of his untimely passing, gives statistically some lead to Davey Johnson. But kind of talk about how, in your mind, you were able to separate the two and at least internally squelch that debate and go with a firm leader.
Mm-hmm. So, this is another one where I think if those who want to make an argument for the winningest manager in Mets history, there's no reason to really question that judgment. How I decided upon Gil Hodges, we go back to my criteria for selecting the book, impact on the franchise. If Tom Seaver, to me, is unquestionably the most important player to ever come to the Mets organization and completely change the attitude of the organization and what people thought of it. We talked about, Steve Cohen changing the perception of the Mets in just a few weeks. Tom Seaver changed it, for forever. And certainly in that moment when he came in 1967, eventually 2 years later, of course, helping them to the World Championship. If Tom Seaver is the most impactful player, to me, Gil Hodges is the most impactful non-player. and definitely one of the most impactful people to ever come to the Mets. Because he comes in there in late 1967, his first year being 1968, and pretty much was like, we're not going to be laughed at anymore. And 68, they improve. Obviously, it's a ninth place finish in a 10-team National League. But then, of course, 1969 happens. So I look at it and I say, and with all due respect to Davey Johnson, I look at Gil Hodges leading the Mets in 69 and saying that 69 team could not have done what it did without Gil Hodges. The 86 team, of course, you got to give a lot of credit, an immense amount of credit to Davey Johnson. But the impact of what Gil Hodges did to that team in 1969 is immeasurable and can't be overstated. And when you hear Tom Seaver at his Hall of Fame speech say that Gil Hodges was the most important person to him in terms of his on-field playing career, when you see Gil Hodges, or you see Bud Harrelson, Jerry Kuzman, Art Shamsky, Ed Crank, I could go on and on. Talk about Gil Hodges with reverence. I mean, they love this. They were so impacted by him. To me, that's what puts Gil Hodges over the top. Record win-loss record aside, and who knows what would have happened if he hadn't passed away in Easter Sunday, 1972. But to me, that kind of lasting impact on those players, and of course what he did to lead the team in 1969, platooning, the whole, whether it was making sure that Tommy Agee, when he was in an early season slump, didn't get, basically didn't spiral out of control. He put him on like a 10-day sabbatical almost, not a sabbatical, but he was a 10-day mental break, which was not a term that was used back then. So he could, right himself, and of course he did. Harnessing, Cleon Jones, whether, the story about the incident in July of 1969, in which that he was dogging it in left field, which is an apocryphal story, but yet nonetheless, there was an impact that came from it. There's just so much there as far as Gil Hodges leading that team and getting it to where it was, that I felt that was the choice I had to make as far as manager.
Now, at number 3, of course, Bobby Valentine. I don't think a lot of people would dispute that number either. I mean, he certainly was a more edgy, controversial manager than Davey or Gil was. I want to talk, though, a little bit briefly before we wrap up about, on my chart, would be the number 4. On other charts, maybe not, the recently retired Terry Collins. Mm-hmm. Where do you think Terry's place in Mets history is as one of the only Met managers to take the team to the playoff twice, and for my money, did a lot with very little?
Yeah, Terry's an interesting candidate in terms of where you put him in Mets history. When I had my first book come out, Mets and Tens, I'm trying to remember where I had him. I think I had him ranked 5th. I may have had him below like Willie Randolph. Would I revise that and move him up to number 4? I don't know. But how I look at Terry Collins, I mean, I have great respect for him. You are correct in the fact that he had very little to deal with, or very little to play with as far as talent is concerned, when he came on board in 2011, in terms of the organization's financial constraints. He was kind of righting the ship for a few years. Then when the team got good in 2015, I think his deficiencies, his managerial deficiencies with respect to managing a bullpen or a lineup, were kind of exposed. And I don't think that had anything to do with them not winning the World Series in 2015. I think if we're going to go to like Game 5 of the World Series, he probably could have taken Matt Harvey out one batter earlier. Nonetheless, it happened. But in 2016, of course, he leads the team to another the postseason again with the late season charge. But nonetheless, I think like his shortcomings as far as as a manager were kind of brought to the forefront when the team was good, and wins were kind of at were wins and losses were more scrutinized. So overall, I mean, I think Terry Collins is a great baseball person. I'm glad that when they let him go as manager, they kept him in the organization. I thought that was the right thing to do. I think that the video of the 2016 when Noah Syndergaard tried to hit Chase Utley, that is overblown, to put it mildly, because that happens all the time, and you just don't hear it. Managers go out there and defend their players and say something to the effect of, "You got to give us our shot." That happens all the time. But that's, still Terry Collins was a player's manager. He defended his players. I would have said that even before I saw the video. So
they loved playing for him, and they made that clear. I mean,
yeah,
I know
that too. And then you see like afterwards Noah Syndergaard and
Yep.
other players say, hey, how much they really respected him. So he garnered that respect. So when it comes to ranking the Mets managers, I mean, he can obviously go no higher than fourth. The fact
Right.
that he leads him to the World Series is certainly reason to put him that high, but definitely no higher.
Yeah, to me, it is the argument between 4 and 5. I mean, obviously Willie is one of them, and Terry is the other. And I think with Terry, I mean, obviously more recent, but I do think that Willie definitely had more to play with, and I think that's kind of why there's a little bit of an edge. I mean, he had the last high-priced Mets roster, or at least till now, hopefully. But he had the last New York worthy Mets roster. And so for my dollars, it was that gives Terry just a little bit of the edge. But man, this has been fun. I could go on talking about this type of stuff for hours. And again, the book, the New York Mets all-time All-Stars, Brian Wright, Lyons Press is the publisher. Brian, can you tell folks how they can get copies of the book? Because again, holiday season, great stocking stuffer. And one thing I like to remind myself every holidays, it's okay to get yourself gifts too.
Yeah, no. So to get the book, a lot of different ways. You can go to your local independent online bookseller. If you go to a bookstore, if those are open, might be able to find it locally around the New York City area. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, of course. But if you'd like a signed copy, and I don't know who wouldn't from me, if you'd like a signed copy, you can reach out to me directly through Twitter. I'm at BrianWright86. Send me a direct message. I'm happy to send a signed copy.
Well, there you go. At some point, we got to fix that because mine's unsigned from Amazon. So we got to get that signed at some point from you.
Yes.
But this has been fun. Like I said, I could go on for hours. I mean, one, it's talking Mets, and two, it's a great book. And like I said, it's great if you're the team some, or if you're getting to know the team, because again, you're a good Met fan. You're bringing the next generation into the picture. So this is a great book to kind of get them interested in the players of the past and the best of the past. And we leave out the Eric Campbells. So, no offense to Eric Campbell personally, but
not even an honorable mention.
Not even an honorable mention. And that's, that kind of goes akin to the players that Terry had to work with. He had to put him in the starting lineup almost every day for a couple seasons. So, Well, Ryan, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate the book. Mets and Tens is also a great book, so I can't recommend that one enough as well. And encourage everybody to check them out. Like I said, make this part of your holiday buying for the Met fans in your life. Brian Wright, again, the book is the New York Mets All-Time All-Stars. Lyons Press is the publisher. You can get Amazon and any other local bookstores. Certainly, if you have a local bookstore in your area, please try and get it from them. No offense to the Amazon folks, but we all know those local bookstores are hurting right now. So any extra business we can throw their way, we want to be able to do that. And, it's that time of year where we gotta take care of our neighborhoods. So if you got a neighborhood bookstore, go grab it there, order it there. Again, New York Mets all-time All-Stars. Brian Wright is the guest. We're extremely happy to have had him with us. And EJ, it's so much fun to talk about some of these guys from the past. And there's just some players that that bring a smile to your face. And I think that's he's not on a lot of teams' all-time greats list. But you think about somebody like Mookie. I mean, how do you not like a Mookie? And I didn't bring this up in the interview, but it kind of struck me during the interview that, in a lot of ways, Nimmo's the new Mookie. He's that guy you can't help but like. And he's not going to make the Hall of Fame probably, and he's not going to make the All-Star team in all likelihood. But you know what? You're going to love every second that he's on your team. And, obviously he's been in some trade rumors of late and may continue to be for the duration of his tenure with the team, however long that may be. But, if there's one thing I'm hoping in this era of getting better and being competitive every year, that we don't lose that little flavor that makes us the Mets. Those Mookies, those Nimmos, those fan favorites, those Benny Agbayanis, that kind of give us our flavor as a fan base, the underdog, if you will, and the sweet guys.
I mean, to be a successful team, you need those guys on the squad. You're not going to have 25 all-stars up and down. You need your super Joe McEwens, the guys who can kind of be versatile for you, get a big hit off the bench. And I agree about Mookie, man. I had the pleasure of working with him and Bill Buckner a whole bunch of times, and you're right. One thing you would see every time Mookie Wilson was doing an autograph signing was from like 5 people back to meeting him, they would just instantly light up and start smiling until they got up to the table. He is just one of those guys who he has a very infectious smile, and he is going to forever be known to Mets fans. The younger generation know who Mookie is. He will always have Game 6, but his character will always be known as well. And I think you're 100% right about Nimmo. But what's funny is Nimmo is the new Mookie after Jake was also the new Mookie, because Jake's another one of those guys who he is just infectious. And while he'll probably have a much more storied career than Nimmo at the end of the day, it is great to have some of these guys who you just really love to root for, and you really feel good about their success when they achieve it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I met Mookie at a signing in 1986, in January of 1986, before the season. They did a big signing at, it was down at Sunrise Mall down in Valley Stream on Long Island. And it was Howard Johnson and Mookie Wilson. Bob Murphy was out there. Our Bob. I have an autographed picture from Bob that is packed away at the moment, but used to sit next to our desk when we do the old podcast. With the number of Mets from past and present. But I tell you, everybody, everybody there, it was all about Mookie, because you're right. He smiles at you. You cannot help but smile back. You're going to smile. If Mookie, you may have no teeth in your mouth, you're going to smile back. I mean, that's the reality of it, because it's an infectious smile. It's a polite smile, and he's just one of the nicest people on the planet. Brandon Nimmo is the very same thing. I met him when he was in AAA, and first thing he wanted to know was my name. He signed my ball to me. And some will do that because they don't want you selling the thing, and that's cool too. But it wasn't that with him. It was, he wanted to have a conversation. He wanted to refer you multiple times by name. And he wanted that personal connection. And I've met a lot of ball players, and I've met a lot of nice ball players. I've met a lot of sweet ball players, and definitely met my share of a-holes. And I can tell you right now, Nimmo was probably, him and Mookie. It was really, and it kind of occurred to me during our conversation with Brian how similar, personality wise that they are, and what they mean to this fan base. It's kind of funny how, and kind of cool how with this team, some things are cyclical. Some of the other things with this team that are cyclical, kind of looking forward to breaking those cycles with Steve Cohen, though. For sure.
If only you could have warned Mookie at that autograph signing not to participate in rundown drills heading into spring training.
It was like 3 weeks after. It was like 3 weeks after that happened.
That was brutal. Gary Carter took that one to his grave. He always felt bad about that.
And the worst part was they put it in the year highlight video, so we watched it over and over and over. And I still have that VHS. I keep meaning to transfer it to digital, but I still have that VHS. I'm still able to watch it, and it still pains me. It's like, why is this on here? Just say it happened.
Right.
Don't show it. It's like Gary Carter running over Mook. Didn't it break the? Oh no, it broke the glass. It's just like, and watching him writhe on the ground. It's like, no, don't do that to my Mookie. Don't do him that way. Don't put that in the dumb video. But alas, it's there for all to see. So if you want to see what we're talking about, 1986 Mets, a year to remember. It's there about 4 minutes in.
It lives digitally on YouTube now, so you can just go to YouTube.
I have watched it there more than once. It's one of those things. I'll recommend this to some of our younger fans. When you're feeling down and the Mets aren't playing so good, you pop that thing on. You pop a smile. I'm going to be honest. You pop a smile, and it makes you kind of forget what's going on in the moment. But what's going on in the moment is good. What's going on in the moment is very promising. And of course, we're still in our giddy about Steve phase here at the Happy Recap. So, we'll continue to watch things throughout the Thanksgiving holiday into December. No winter meetings this year. That'll be virtual, but one would assume that EJ will start to see some player maneuverings throughout baseball come first week of December, second week of December. It's going to be a little bit later than usual because I do think teams are waiting on specifically the Mets and to a lesser extent the Phillies to see what they're going to do with their front offices. But because everybody's going to want that offer from Steve Cohen. I think we know that already. We've discussed it. They're waiting for that offer, but we're not too far from things starting to get done, and we'll be with you all along. But I'm looking forward to our next show. Barring any news in the interim, our next plan is to talk about this year's Hall of Fame ballot. And EJ, this should be a fun show, and talking about a lot of different players, including some former Mets, and deciding where yay or nay on these guys, because it's once you've gotten some of the bigger names off the ballot, there are a lot of asterisks next to players in a lot of people's minds of the great ones that are left. And it's also kind of, I wouldn't say there are any real new big names on the list this year from last year. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation and an interesting debate.
I agree. I think looking at this year's ballot, it is chock full of qualified names. It's so funny. In years past, I've advocated, maybe one or two guys you could let in. I think I can make a legitimate case for double digits of the guys who are actually on the ballot this year. So we will have what was sure to be a riveting conversation about that next time we get together.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, my friend. Until then, let's go Mets.